Skill Builder. Today, we are meeting with some experts from Databricks that are going to tell us all about Databricks apps and what you can do with those. So be prepared for a deep dive. Today, we have with us Ivan and Giran, and they are going to take it from here. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Stephanie. Giran, would you mind starting it off?
Yes, of course, my friend. Let me go and let's see how we do this. All right. So let's do the screen. Do the entire window. And here we go. So hopefully that's coming through. We do know we started at the kind of top of the hour, so we'll wait for a number of people to turn in. But just a bit of housekeeping on the stream there today. So we'll be using the YouTube channel to, I believe, to handle the questions. We'll also try to have some dedicated time at the end for this. So, feel free to pop your questions and we'll do our best to address them later on. We'll also do record them. So if there's anything that's kind of outstanding, we're able to collect them and then subsequently arrange that with your appropriate account teams to help support you as well. Worth pointing out as well that this session will be recorded and we'll try to provide the decks to you in a PDF format there as well. So wherever you're joining the world, thank you for tuning in. Good morning, good afternoon, maybe good evening for those maybe down under. And just so your awareness, so you're actually tuned into the Databricks Skills Builder, and today we're going to be deep diving into Databricks apps. So for all those who may not be familiar, my name is Giran Moodley, and I'm a solution architect supporting strategic customers across EMEA. I've been at Databricks now for 2 years, but I have over a decade of experience in building and operating full stack mission critical applications across the enterprise. As such, today is very close topic to my heart, and I'm very honored to be speaking to you all today on this with my colleague and friend. Ivan, over to you, buddy.
Thank you, Giran. Hi, everyone. My name is Ivan Truzov. I'm a senior specialist solutions architect at Databricks. I've been with the company for almost more than 4 years. The time flies. And yeah, when the Databricks apps was introduced as a new kind of product surface that we have, I immediately, got interested in it. And since then, I have been kind of partially working as a subject matter expert on the topic of Databricks apps, and I had the pleasure to discover very interesting cases with Databricks apps, and the technology seems to be very, very promising. Yep, and it's my absolute pleasure to co-present today with Giran, and I assume this goes back to you, Giran, right?
Awesome. And yeah, just Ivan's got a very funny story. I mean, even a heroic story to share. So we'll definitely want to save that till the as we proceed. Thank you, Ivan.
At the demo stage, I would assume.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, just to kind of maybe set the scene, in today's session, what we really want to do is give you a sufficient understanding of Databricks apps. So we'll kind of work from the ground up. We understand that a lot of you on the call may come from different backgrounds and experiences. So we'll do our best to hopefully get you up to speed with this. At the end of the session, what we're hoping to do is give you an understanding of what Databricks apps is, gain some practical knowledge and tips on how to develop apps using Databricks, and lastly, understand a little about the longer term vision we see for this great product and how it might actually benefit your organization. In terms of the agenda today, what I will be doing is providing an introduction to Databricks and the initial development lifecycle. I'll then hand it over to Ivan, who will kick it up a notch with a live demonstration and get into the details of the architecture. And then we'll take round it up really nicely around showing some of the product updates, along with the roadmaps, and summarize with some key takeaways. And depending on the stream as well, we'll open up the Q&A towards the end. So let's proceed with the show. So let's provide an introduction into Databricks apps. Okay. Maybe to help set the context, it's important to describe what we mean by a data and AI application. An application, or an app, as we refer to it, is an interactive program mainly for non-technical folks to use, ideally on a frequent basis. In the world that we live in now, we see applications become more data and AI enabled. Thus the term data and AI applications, with a strong bearing focus on leveraging big data, analytics, and advanced AI and machine learning to drive critical business decisions. Many of us today would have likely have used a data application without even thinking about it. Just to kind of give you some examples, if you think about Uber, right? So being able to choose a tailored journey with a competitive price and track the status of your ride in real time, leveraging some of those machine learning models backed by massive data sets and using kind of things like IoT devices at scale. health applications, for example, tracking the progress of your activities and providing proactive suggestions on how to improve, adjusting for changes to individual circumstances. I mean, like all of us, hopefully we've had a very extensive holiday season, and a lot of us were kind of doing dry January and seeing the effects of that as we progress. And even coming back to kind of a more basic customer exploration, when certain types of data sets, which are very unique in their type, you're able to visualize them using the appropriate graphing strategy. And this is kind of allocated there on the graph there below. And what this really does is just allows us to understand the context a lot better than looking at the kind of a tabular structure as we might be kind of used to. And this might sound great, right? So data and applications, hopefully we'll try to bring it out to a lot of people, but there seems to be a recurring theme that we speak to a lot of our customers is, do we actually need them? Databricks is such a robust platform. Why can't we just use the notebooks and dashboards? So as many technical folks on the call will know, notebooks are a great way to handle arbitrary data, maybe amend some code and quickly inspect the data set with standard visualization presets. However, for non-technical, let's call them business users, who don't really have the ability to code in languages like Python or Spark or SQL, they aren't really as user-friendly as you could think, and they can even be off-putting in certain circumstances. To us, this really does not make Databricks simple. And if you think about it, would you really want to give your CEO a notebook to look at a forecasting report? Probably not. Consequently, you might have seen that Databricks as an organization, we've invested a great deal of time and effort into building out low to no code dashboarding capabilities with Lakeview under our AI and BI umbrella. Lakeview also enables users to visualize standards, structured data, and present a curated set of information with ease, but it's not really designed to be flexible for more complex workflows. And what we're really seeing now is this advent to fill this gap, and this is really where data and AI applications come in, where it allows users to have a flexible, interactive, customizable user journey that moves beyond these two surfaces, so to speak. And like all amazing feats, the reality is that the path to this greatness is not quite straightforward. Creating consumer-grade data and AI applications can be incredibly difficult to build, test, deploy, and operate in a production setting. Like typically, these apps require specialized DevOps resources to build out the environment from the infrastructure, do a lot of testing. And this actually increases the stakeholder management between teams and actually slows down the overall development process. I mean, for those of you in the call, if you've ever worked in an organization trying to get in, let's say, a VM instance, and that takes 3 weeks just to put something in development, you can understand this pain. Some organizations, especially highly regulated companies, like in financial services and healthcare, are quite risk averse. And so what they will try to do is minimize the damage radius by introducing additional hurdles for users to obtain an environment, just like I've articulated. And lastly, we also observe that while apps are powerful, they can be wrongly deployed, putting organizations at risk through errors and vulnerabilities by using inconsistent governance models in place and a poor development lifecycle. You've seen this when you're using kind of AI powered tools, and then somebody leaks a secret, and now it's available for the whole world to use. Again, we want to be able to move away from that. And if we also look at what it looks like to build a modern stack in 2025, this is quite a convoluted story. And I'm looking at roadmap.sh here. It's a fantastic website. So firstly, all roads lead to the browser stack. And like it or not, you need some grounding in the web framework. So HTML, CSS, and everyone's favorite language on the call, JavaScript. You'll then need to proceed with some initial bundling and learn how NPM works. So for those who are not familiar, this is the pip equivalent for Node.js. And then we want to move up the stack with more advanced frameworks like React and Tailwind. You may also want to save your work and check that in with a reliable version control service like Git. The fun doesn't stop there. And then you actually have to fetch the data from the source. So be prepared to add another layer for the backend. Most of these real-time apps require OLTP and low latency. So you're going to need a sprinkling of an RDBS and a caching layer. You may ask, why can't you just connect directly? And the good question to that is, let's create a REST API for that, as well as an authentication layer. But are you even really a developer if you ever use Linux? So Jeff Bezos and Andy Jassy control the cloud. So AWS is the best. Everything boils down to compute, storage, and networking. And then we just wrap this up in a nice complex ball with automation, both on the infrastructure side as well as the application. And congrats, you're now an expert, but you're most likely as confused as Uncle Jackie here. There must be a better way to do this, and there is with Databricks Apps. Databricks Apps is a new product that allows almost anybody in the organization to build and deploy a data and AI application on our intelligence platform. We've greatly simplified the user experience by empowering users to build applications using tools and technologies that are open and familiar to use. Rather than be boxed in with a new proprietary technology, we can now accelerate users with frameworks they know and love. Databricks Apps is part of your existing deployment, so you have production-grade environment to use straight away without requiring any specialist infrastructure knowledge or security sign-off. We use cloud-native serverless architecture to provision and deploy apps with ease. And in addition to this batteries-included environment, you will also leverage the robust inbuilt security models from Databricks, right from the infrastructure layer down to identity management and Unity Catalog for all of your data and AI assets. To give you the top-level highlights, Databricks Apps supports any open framework. So anything that's a web server gateway or async gateway that can be deployed on the web can be deployed in Databricks Apps. So some of the popular frameworks that you might use and love, like Flask, Dash, Streamlit, can all run efficiently on the environment. But even if you wanted to use things like HTTP server, you could do that if you're feeling very adventurous. Using our serverless architecture, deploying an app has never been easier. It takes a few minutes to provision capacity, and deployments and hot reloads even quicker within a few seconds. Long gone are the days where you need to make a cup of coffee and come back to see the result in the classical world of working with Databricks. And as we have a very tight integration with our customers' identity providers, as well as single sign-on systems, it's actually possible now for non-workspace users to use Databricks. For us, more users equate to more usage, and we have more value from that, where we want to be able to democratize users to wider business, non-technical users from that perspective. And with everything in mind, security is the utmost important capability for our customers. So you have this from day one, including things like OAuth authorization and a dedicated service principal, which has UC permissions. There's no need to build a whole new governance model, just use the existing toolkit that's available. We'll also talk about what it means from a user-based credentials a little bit later on in the presentation there today as well. So the question that we always get asked is, who actually is responsible for interacting with Databricks apps? So we see this happening in kind of two camps. Ideally, what we want to be able to do is provide Databricks apps to non-technical business users. They could be from members of sales, marketing, finance, HR, even internal IT teams that want to be able to kind of take care and understand these how the data works in an organization. And consequently, you have the builders. So these are the individuals that you see on the left-hand side. So traditionally, we start to think of the kind of data team. So the data engineers, data scientists, and data analysts are very quickly able to build these applications with ease. But increasingly, what we have seen generally across the industry is a number of software developers shifting left. So not only are they trying to build applications in a full stack manner, they're trying to get closer to the data, because there's an expression where data has gravity and there's value associated with that. So the closer you can get to the customer, the closer you can understand the data, the better it is to build applications with service and add value to your organization. And this is really critical when it comes to developing things in a very agile manner, because you're using applications that have been deployed very quickly, it's easy to get a feedback loop from those business users. And because of the way that we're developing things using Databricks apps, it just allows us to be a bit more agile, deploy those changes, and get to understanding what your roadmap looks like. And we'll talk about this in a bit more detail as well. To give you an idea, again, there's many different ways to use Databricks apps, and by all means, your imagination can run wild. I'm just trying to give you a little bit of some of the core examples of what we've seen customers use it today, but I'll also talk a little bit about what we're actually seeing or being deployed in a production manner. But to give you an idea, again, if we're moving away from the traditional static looking at data, going to a little bit more interacting, writing data back to the workspace, Databricks apps is perfectly designed to do that. So a lot of our customers who are deploying apps today, they take an existing framework, an existing way they would do things with their notebooks, and repurpose it for building it and serving it to the end users. This could be things like an HR application form, for example, where someone uploads a PDF that triggers a Databricks job that parses that information through, stores it in a vector search database with the embeddings, and then it's actually used to train a particular machine model, and then use it to summarize the particular user's data there as well. And again, we have many different ways of orchestrating that as well. Really key thing to Databricks Apps is because it's built on the open framework, you're actually able to use existing applications as well. So if you deploy something like N8N, for example, you can actually do that on Databricks Apps. And yes, we can show you how that would look like. Okay, you may be answering, so we've been using Databricks now, it's under public preview. What is it? You know, how customers are interacting with us on a kind of day-to-day basis. And here's a kind of a select number of customers, and by all means, this is not the entire list. I promise you, we do have thousands of customers using this in anger, but just wanted to kind of highlight, directly from users themselves who have actually taken the early leap into using things like Databricks to help accelerate some of those goals that I talked about. So if you look at Aon Digital Technology there, again, they were able to kind of bypass a lot of their internal hurdles when it comes to deploying applications. So because Databricks was already approved for use in the organization with our security model, it was very easy for them to activate the capability and then start to build an application quite quickly. Similarly, that we see that with Addy is there as well. Again, it comes down to increasing the developer productivity and reducing that overall TCO. And likely looking at something from SAE International, where we've got an actual business, or let's say data scientists, directly democratize an application that they've built using Databricks through a RAG architecture, and then surfacing that to internal users to use very, very quickly in that perspective. Okay, so this section, we're going to talk a little bit about, okay, how do we get started with Databricks apps, what it looks like from a framework perspective, and then getting into that internal developer lifecycle. I'll then, at some point as well, I'll hand it over to Yvonne to get more into the kind of details, and we'll bring it to life with a real life example that we've prepared, and then take it from there. Right. So in terms of the frameworks there today, as mentioned, there's a number of ways of we're looking of how you can look at deploying your application. And it's worth taking a step back and understanding some of the available options that you might have within Databricks today. So moving from left to right refers to, what are some of the ways that we can help democratize and push out this information to users with the control of complexity in place. And what I mean by that is typically, again, we allow users to curate the data sets and then publish out using the dashboard. So that with things like Lakeview, it allows you to visualize your data very, very quickly. But then if you want to move beyond the dashboard and actually interact with your data through a natural language interface, we have Genie to do that. So in that particular scenario, Genie is going to help extend questions that the dashboards can't necessarily do. But when it comes to building a little bit more complexity and moving aside where users want to interact with that data and get things back in a bit more real time, this is really where apps comes into play. And to do this, we kind of offer two main routes. So there's a first route, which is simplifying this with using the out-of-the-box templates and frameworks to build that initial data application. But then as you decide to get a bit more complex in terms of what you need, you may want to start looking at things from a full stack operations. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But again, it's all about choosing the path that makes sense to you. What I have seen from personal experience is sometimes our customers would want to start using a full-stack, full-fledged application straight away. But in reality, actually, all they needed to do was have a bit of a Genie application and then extend it on with the Databricks app there as well. So again, we want to make things a lot simpler for you. So our advice is start simple, iterate on that, and be able to kind of move that interchangeably with Databricks apps. As mentioned, again, we support most of the open frameworks out there. We do support anything that's compatible using Python, but out of what we understand with our customers, we support a number of core ones out of the box, including Dash, Flask, Gradio, Shiny, and Streamlit, to name a few. So when you do create a Databricks apps, either in the UI or through the API, you'll have the ability to choose these templates, which are kind of backed against a Git folder as well. And I'll walk through an example shortly. All right. One of the questions that we always get asked, and again, similar to what I articulated, is what is the framework or what is the guidance that you want to choose between let's say a Databricks apps that's kind of pure Python versus something that's a bit more full stack. And maybe just to kind of help paint the picture here, it's just really understanding using the right framework for the right job. And one of the great things about Python is, we sort of see this as our core user base. Again, so a lot of people who developed with Python, if they're using kind of PySpark or so forth, will understand how this framework works. So using things like Dash, Streamlit, and so forth, again, it's just writing Python with a different set of APIs. And again, because it's all based on Python, your same developer or the way of you approaching code will still exist. Key thing with these frameworks as well is they have a very tight integration with server-side logic. So there's a lot of things that we can process purely based on Python without needing to offload elsewhere. And we'll talk a little bit about like when you're doing more heavy scale compute, how that looks, but it's very, very tightly integrated and it makes it a lot easier to handle things just by purely using Python. Kind of key thing with this as well, if you're using a pure Python framework, is you're able to actually pull in additional kind of customization. So if you're using a custom library or something that you've built, you're able to pull that information in through Databricks and then use it as part of your application. But again, it comes down to how bespoke you want the front end to look like. And that's really where you want to decide using things like JavaScript, for example. So in this case, when you're moving to a more complex application where you have a lot of user interactions, a lot of state logic, a lot of complex rendering, JavaScript is probably going to be the better position to do. And again, there are no shortage of open source frameworks like React, Vue, Angular, and Svelte, to name them, so forth. But again, a lot of these also include a batteries included environment where you're able to pull the toolkit, create an application, and start developing quite straight away. It does go to say that, again, a lot of these advancements in front-end application, they can be very, very powerful, but again, they will require some knowledge at least of, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to give you that full experience. But the idea is that because you know the language of the web, you're able to customize it exactly how you want. And when it comes to creating things like aesthetic UIs and very performant UIs, that's going to be the framework of choice when it comes to that. Right. And in this case, one of the things I would say, it's not an either or, it's a sort of a better together story. So you will still, under this paradigm, use Databricks apps and specifically the Python framework to service a web API, but then you can also build your front-end API using JavaScript and pull that down. So in the current state of Databricks today, you're able to actually create an application that's developed in a React front end. What you would then do is you would compile that down to a static bundle of HTML, CSS, and JS, put that as part of the application deployment, and then pull that into the application. And the way that it works is we can do certain routes behind it. So we'll have a separate API route for the backend call. So if you want to call a microservice or you want to call on a SQL warehouse, again, that can be supported through this paradigm. So again, Ivan will talk you through that in a bit more detail, but rest assured, yes, this is us working together to help build that scenario. Okay. Now, in terms of the developer experience, I've kind of wanted to kind of go through a little bit about what does it mean to develop on Databricks apps there today. So when you create a Databricks apps, or what we could refer to as an application slot, we actually provision compute and memory on your behalf through the serverless architecture. So each application will have around 2 vCPUs as well as 6 gigabytes of RAM, of memory. So this runs actually under a serverless, a sort of a container under a managed Kubernetes cluster, which is actually multi-availability zone. And the key thing to this is there's no Spark session with this. So if you want to do more complex memory-intensive workloads, your best bet is to actually offload that into a thing like a Databricks cluster or SQL warehouse. And again, we'll show that in the example there today. again, as part of the deployment, we're using a hardened Ubuntu image. So we provide a non-Databricks runtime environment where the application code is then copied into the local container, and then it's secured down with a non-root access. So effectively, you'll be able to provide an entry point, and we'll go through that. And because today we will only support a Python runtime environment, so we can't preload it with Python 3.11, but it is actually possible to maybe augment that environment. So we'll talk a little bit about what it means from a dependencies perspective. A configuration, we'll go through this in a little bit more detail, provided as a YAML spec. And lastly, once the application is then deployed and assuming it's functional, you get access to a HTTPS a secured environment, which you can then access. And again, this will be backed by your identity provider. So from that perspective. Okay. And when it comes to developing the application, you have the ability to provide certain associated resources with that application. This means things like identifying from a cost control perspective, as well as an app isolation perspective from this manner. So when it comes to creating an app, you can then associate it with specific resources like the SQL warehouse, a model serving endpoint, a job, as well as a secret, which I'll articulate in the next slide. So as an example to this, again, in terms of best practices, we don't really want to be storing this information directly in the application code. We can use the Databricks Secret Manager to be able to pull this information and to use to in a very secure manner. And what pointing out is a lot of these resources have inheritance built in. So if you deploy something as part of a particular group or on behalf of that application, then inherits the permissions from the creator. So really, really key to building this model is understanding what those permissions look like and making sure the service principal has the appropriate permissions, not just from a workspace perspective, but also a Unity catalog perspective as well. Okay. In terms of building the application, I'll talk about using this from a Flask application. So for those who don't know, Flask is a very standard application framework, which is used to kind of service web applications in this case. So in this particular example, what you're seeing here is a deployment where I've created a simple Flask application in my Databricks workspace, and I've kind of got three more important files here. So these three files are application .py, so which is the main code entry point. I've got a YAML for the configuration and the requirements text for my additional libraries. Key thing with this as well is, we also support things in relation to Git folders. So the idea there is, you would develop code locally, push it up, have that checked in, and use that as part of it within Databricks there today. In this example, requirements text, again, I've created a custom library for Beautiful Soup with a specific version. In the configuration file, I've specified a very simple application command to run. So in this case, I'm passing in flask.app.run, as well as a custom environment variable, but we can also supply secrets there as well, which can be referenced. And again, in a very simple code app entry point is I'm just rendering a simple page here, for example, that's being deployed in this case. So again, three files. I've got an application code, I've got a configuration, and then my optional requirements of text to determine the dependencies. Okay, and also interacting with the workspace, we do actually have things in relation to the SDK, which is inbuilt as part of the application runtime. Okay. When it comes to deploying these applications, so the recommendation, like most things, is to develop your code locally, check that there's no logical errors, make sure you run your test. And then when you're ready to proceed, you then publish it to a workspace, which what we've done in the previous example. You can decide to create the app using the UI or through the API. And in this case, once that's deployed, within a few minutes, we'll provision the application compute, and then your URL should be accessible there as well. Like many things, and again, we'll talk about this in a bit more detail, but we also want to make sure you use things like CI/CD and automation and best practices. So again, we can provide toolkits and ways to work with that. So again, as an example, if you're familiar with developing things from a software perspective, we want to make sure that code that we deploy on a machine is reliable and then works across different environments. So using things like CI and CD are very, very important. And there's a great session that's on DSP there today. So we'll definitely make sure that we will provide that to you. In terms of looking at it, how we would actually industrialize CI and CD, we have support for Databricks asset bundles or DABs. And for those who are not familiar, DABs is a framework that allows users to declare Databricks assets and resources in a programmatic and deterministic way. So rather than going through the UI, clicking, granting the permissions, you can kind of codify this and have it authored in a way that's sort of governed and checked in as code from that perspective. And this is a quick example to show you how you would do that from this perspective. When it comes to debugging, again, one of my personal pet peeves is people are using print statements. There's a bit of an alliteration there. So I thought the best thing to do is give people a example of how you would use a login statement. So really key to this is when you log your code today, it's actually showing you this in real time within the Databricks UI. But then this is also available for you in a separate window. And one of the things that did throw me out there, which is the fact that these logs are actually in reverse chronological order. So you see the most recent log at the top, which does throw you off because as an operator, I'm so used to writing, tailf and looking at it from the bottom. So just to be aware of that. Key thing with this is because these containers are also ephemeral, when your computer stopped or restarted, these get wiped out. So really kind of key to, as you're developing the stuff, is think about ways of where we can pipe this information to a telemetry or monitoring tool from that perspective as well. Key as well with a lot of things is data sensitivity. So if you are trying to, for whatever reason, print a secret, that'll be redacted in this UI as well. Okay. And lastly, just to kind of wrap this up as well, again, we appreciate that security and governance is the utmost important thing. So we want to make sure is that users and, let's say, system administrators have a way to understand, how applications are being used. So as available today, there's a capability called systems tables, and what this lets you do is allow you to see how your Databricks platform are being used across the board. So when it comes to looking at things like logins to a particular application or things in relation to development or permission changes, that's available there as well. And it's actually important that we actually loop this as part of the AI security framework there as well. So that's been updated to include things like Databricks Apps as well. Perfect. I'm going to take a pause there. I hope there's probably some questions as well, but Ivan, I'll probably want to hand it over to you, my friend, to take us through the next portion of this presentation.
Sure, yes. I just need a second to configure my screen, and while I'm doing so, please feel free to ask your questions in the chat. We are always welcome to respond. And since it's two of us, while one is working as a talking head, another person can respond to your questions. So please feel free to drop them in the chat. Okay, and I am going to continue from where you have stopped, Giran. I am just trying to figure out if my screen is visible.
Yes, it is. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, perfect. So when we're talking about development experience in general and developing any kind of an application, we always need to touch upon the topic of common issues and how to debug them, how to find the problems and how to work around them. So first of all, there are things which can be failing inside the code base that you are running on the Databricks apps. And well, Databricks apps and Databricks platform in general is quite a powerful platform. I don't think there is a system which can automatically fix logical issues in your code yet. Probably you can use a tool like Copilot or any other coding assistant of your choice, because apps and apps code can be run locally and tested locally before doing the deployment step. So in many times when I see different customers reaching out, usually it is something inside the container, and we do not walk or do not see anything inside your container. This is something there where you need to debug things yourselves. We recommend to use standard local ID tooling for debugging, especially when you're running your application locally. This is really convenient. You can do breakpoints, you can search through, and things like that. And indeed, we recommend to add logs to catch up on specific behavior inside your application. Second thing, which happens more oftenly too, is the misconfiguration of your environment. My recommendation here would be the following. First of all, check the environment variables at the startup. There are various libraries in Python which allow you to verify whenever the specific environment variable or a command argument is properly provided. My personal favorite is Pydantic and its extension Pydantic underscore settings. It's an open source library, quite a standard one for modern Python applications. And in Python specifically, this allows you to work correctly and easily identify any problems. If you're using JavaScript or TypeScript based applications, sometimes the problem is with misconfigured cores. There are so many documentation about how to fix cores and how to see the problem there. Usually everything works well by default unless you're doing something very, very much advanced, like maybe embedding an iframe and doing things like that. This may have some problems out of the box, but in case if you're doing this, you probably kind of know where to search for the clues. Final thing, very important, there is absolutely no need to use personal access tokens of any kind when you are running a Databricks app. When app starts, it provides in the environment variables all the necessary things which are required by Databricks Python SDK to use a workspace client and immediately initiate it. There is completely no need to add path tokens manually or do anything like that. You can practically import the workspace client, initialize an instance of this, and you are good to go. You don't need to add path token as a secret or anything like that. Final thing, which also happens quite frequently, is that the startup command is not configured properly. It can be just a typo or maybe relative path incorrectly configured. There could be reasons. The easiest thing to check here probably is just to run this command in the local Docker container and just to verify that things are working as expected. Second problem, which happens quite often, is that not all relevant files are properly uploaded inside the package. This especially happens if you are using Python packaging and you have some static asset, let's say a folder with index.html file, and you did not explicitly specify that this folder, it's not Python code, and you did not specify for your package manager that it needs to be included. This is also where things could happen. And indeed, check the relative paths of your code and make sure that the syntax of the command is correct. Now, given all these advices and all of the context, I would suggest we take a look at an actual product example which is built using Databricks Apps. I wrote a blog post which explains this thing in a particular detail with all of the necessary things you might be looking for. The blog post is public. It's available on LinkedIn. You can scan the QR code to get there. You can also find it by the name, and the source code is also provided. So if you want to repeat these steps or maybe fork the repository out and build your own version of this, please feel free to do so. This specific article shows this customized application which uses JS and React specifically on the front end and Pythonic API on the backend. And what I'm going to do just now is to actually demonstrate this application and how exactly and specifically it is built. So let's take a look at the source code of this application. We're going to start from the backend code, and practically the main lines of the backend are here. I hope they are visible enough. Giran, would you mind telling me if they are visible enough here?
Yep, it looks like that to me. And I'm also looking at
Okay.
through the stream as well. So yeah,
Perfect,
brilliant.
perfect. I just wanted to check on that. Okay, so let's take a look at our application. So the application root of the application is a very standard framework which many Python developers are using nowadays, and it is Fast API. It's just a Fast API app. And then we have two sub applications for this Fast API. The one application is the UI, and another sub application is the API. The UI piece, as you can see, is just serving static files. I don't like the name static files here because the files are not so static, in fact, because the files that we are serving are coming from this assets path. And if we take a look at this assets path, this is practically an index.html file and set of JS, CSS, and everything else related to it. What is important here is that index.html, HTML by itself has no dynamics inside it, but when we have JS together with it, it becomes actionable. You can have buttons, they can be clicked, and many other user interactions can happen on the front end. And CSS adds this styling. So for those who are not familiar with front-end development, those are the components. So what we do is that we serve this as a path, as a root path of our application. However, to enrich the front end with data, we need to expose an API route. And the API route here is only available inside from a client which reaches out to this API through the browser practically. So, it's not kind of a public API in a sense. You cannot send a query there or something like this. So what I'm doing here is that I'm practically mounting these two applications. The one is the /API. It will respond to the API calls. And the second one is just a root path, which will open the actual UI. Okay. And on the API, I practically have just one route, and this route is returning the density data. We will get into that piece. For now, we can just take a look at the result of such an application. And if we just quickly take a look at it, the application itself will look like this. So as you can see, this is quite a UI-rich application. It has styles, it has a lot of things which are coming together from Shatsian and React. I really like Shatsian. I think this is a great library. And it's also styled using Tailwind, CSS, and some other components. So as you can see, we really can build very responsive, very nice looking applications here with Databricks apps. But indeed, just an application with a button is not the most interesting piece. What could be an interesting piece is, for example, a 3D visualization of the population map. This one in particular is based on Facebook HDX data. Is provided by Meta. And what I'm doing is that I'm practically mapping the density data in the form of these hexagons onto the German map. The data is actual of 2019, but it's just as an example of how rich such client-side application could be. And the actual data is very much detailed. So it has a precision of roughly 700 square meters. So as you can see, it is like a really precise set of hexagons, which are practically covering the whole space. Depending on the level of zooming, you probably may need, to move a little bit the switches here. And this is, again, very rich, very powerful UI level controls. And we can control many things here. We can control the coverage metrics. We can also control the opacity and many other things. What is important is that this data is, well, quite heavy actually. This is more than 400,000 data points which are currently visualized in our browser. And if I wish to serve something like this from my backend application, I probably would look for some kind of efficient format which allows me to exchange this between the API and the client. So let's take a look at how these things are collected on the client side, because on the client side we will load the density data. So what I'm using here is that I have like a small API constant or class, if you wish, and it has this function. This function is called getDensity, and what it will do is that it will reach out to the API endpoint and call this density route. And the response is interesting. It's not JSON, right? Because the JSON would be quite cumbersome to serialize, then deserialize again. It's a little bit of an overhead. Instead, we're using the richness of the ecosystem, and I'm using here Arrow. Arrow is a tabular format, Apache Arrow. It's an open source tabular format, which allows you to quickly exchange data between different systems. And the cool thing is, because we are running our backend and our backend is connected to Databricks SQL connector is capable of processing the data in Arrow format, which means no additional serialization on the backend. I can immediately stream the data down towards the front end and only deserialize it once, already on the front end. Let's take a look at the front end code. So this is my get density route. And what it is doing, it's returning a streaming response from this function. And this function is just a generator of bytes. Let's take a look how this function works. Well, first of all, we will need to connect to Databricks. And this is exactly what I am doing here. I have this connection object, and I am creating a cursor, and then I am executing the query. Let's take a look at the query inside. As you can see, this is a relatively simple query, in fact, because what it does is that it selects from the table, which has 3 columns, longitude, latitude, and the population value. So what we can do is that we can use Databricks SQL functions, H3 friendly SQL functions, to quickly get the H3 hex codes and aggregate this to a level of detail which suits for our visualization. 8 is a quite detailed level. It means, as I've said, if I'm not mistaken, roughly 700 square meters, which is actually like less than a square kilometer. Quite precise way of displaying the data. You obviously can go more, but maybe some optimizations will be required. And then I'm also adding a little bit of a clip here using a SQL statement, just to avoid, some strangely looking outbursts on the map, because the data is indeed, as any data, may not be like 100% clean or anything like that. So executing this query, I then fetching it, but I am not deserializing this data, right? I'm not setting this data into some kind of a JSON format or a set of Python dictionaries. I am fetching it as an arrow table, and this arrow table is a virtual object. It's practically just raw in memory bytes. And what I'm doing then is that I'm just taking the data from this table and I am streaming this data down towards the UI in raw byte chunks. And by doing so, I do not need to think about the data format on the backend. I am quite sure that this whole chain will work and it will work fast. This is a really convenient example of using Arrow here. However, if I wish, indeed, I can just switch over and use, standard REST or GraphQL-based API. There is no limitation in this perspective. Okay, so now given this, I can just deploy this application, right? And to deploy the application, I need to define some dependencies. This application, or resources as we call them, this application specifically needs a Databricks SQL warehouse to perform those computations. We need to connect somewhere and we need to execute the SQL somewhere. How can I do this? And the good thing is that recently we announced, and it's already available, that you can use Databricks bundles to deploy the jobs and apps too. So this is quite important. Like jobs and workflows were always part of the Databricks asset bundles, but apps are a new addition to this. So what I'm doing here is that I am describing how exactly my application should be deployed, what kind of environment variables I need to provide to it, and what kind of resources this application will require. And as you can see, this application is going to use the SQL warehouse. So what I'm doing here is that I'm just saying, okay, please attach this application to the SQL warehouse and make sure that it has the can use permissions. And then I can also reference the ID of this warehouse here to ease the configuration story. So I don't need to think if the SQL warehouse changes, I don't need to change anything in my code. I can just, customly configure this. This is really convenient for me. Okay. And final piece, maybe in terms of deployment. So as you can see, my front end is kind of a heavyweight project, which uses Vite to generate static assets into this folder. I probably would like to do this as a part of my Python build. And the good thing is that I'm using Hedge as a project management tool here, and Hedge supports custom hooks. So what I can do is that I can just add quickly here a custom hook, which will, during the build of my Python wheel, it will practically generate all the necessary yarn. So it will use yarn to generate all the necessary static materials. Okay. And yeah, this is practically the deployment logic for my application, right? So I can easily pack this up into a databricks.yaml file. And what I can do now is that I can just run Databricks bundle deploy. And I'm using a profile here because this kind of eases the deployment process. This will create the application, make sure it's connected to the relevant resource and everything. Deployment and running are separated because sometimes you may not be ready to run the application, but you already want kind of to pre-create it. So I can use Databricks bundle deploy to deploy my application towards Databricks. And then I can use a Databricks bundle run to run the application on Databricks. And indeed, since this is a CLI command, it is intended to be used in your CI/CD pipelines. Giran was talking about the CI/CD automation steps, so this is practically it. The easiest way to start with deployment of a Databricks app is to use this YAML file, describe the app configuration, and then just use bundle deploy to deploy the app. Indeed, for more complex use cases, you may consider using something like Terraform, or you may consider using something like some other solutions. There are many options, right? What I want to highlight is that for the simplest case, if you don't know Terraform, YAML file is a very convenient way of doing this. This already gives you, this already brings you closer to standard deployment patterns. So really recommended to use it like this. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Perfect. With this in mind, just a quick look into our application. So as I've said, right, so this is my application. It looks like this. I'm using here several components for this 3D visualization. I'm using Carto as the level of the map, so I can give it a light version or a dark version. Looks nice. And I'm using deck.jl, which is an open source React library, which allows me, to quickly add layers and, interact with the map. It supports, shifting, from different sides. I can also dynamically change various things like adjustment functions and things like that. So this is a really convenient kind of a library, and it also, as you can see, it supports all kinds of customizations. So this is really convenient. I can also, choose the color and many things here. Uh, and this is all customizable again. So, you're not limited to presets or some kind of predefined components. If I want to change this or use a different framework, I can do this immediately, right? So this is quite a convenient story for the developer, and you can deliver exactly the interfaces the users are asking you to have for your data applications. Okay, with this in mind, I would like to get back and talk about the architecture and security of this. So as we have seen with this example showcase application, it reaches out to Databricks SQL Warehouse, and would be nice to understand, what is the security layer behind this. So let's talk about this. First of all, how does that look like in terms of technologies, right? Very high level overview. So Databricks has something which is called control plane. And control plane is the set of Databricks services deployed in the same cloud, in the same region where you are operating. And the Databricks control plane hosts several services, such as web application, compute manager, workflow manager, Unity catalog service, and so on and so forth. Next to the control plane, but indeed in a separated kind of environment, we have the serverless compute. Serverless compute is exactly where Databricks applications are running. And serverless compute for Databricks apps, as Giran was also talking about this, Databricks apps are not the place where you would like to run heavy computations. You probably would like to avoid running, like long-term jobs with apps or anything like this. Because at Databricks, we have way better, way more controlled surfaces to do so. But what apps definitely can do is that they can reach out to different services and product surfaces that you run on Databricks and communicate with them using Databricks SDK. And in my example here, the app is reaching out to a SQL warehouse to send a query, then somehow pre-process the response and return it back to the client UI. Indeed, you can connect from your Databricks app to a model serving endpoint or to a vector search endpoint and many other sources. Practically everything on Databricks has an API. So you can even build your own custom Databricks UI if you wish. The only question is why, but you practically can do this. And then finally, the serverless compute will reach out to the data plane, which is your cloud account, and read from there, from the cloud storage or from other external APIs, and so on and so forth. The connectivity between Databricks serverless plane and the data plane is a wider topic. I will not touch upon this today, but if you're looking for assistance on that, please reach out to your account teams. We're happy to explain that in detail too. Okay, so let's assume this example, the one I've been showing to you, right? My data physically is stored in a table, and table is just a set of files in object storage, like in S3, in ADLS, or in GCS, or maybe R2. There are many options. So what happens if from the application, the user wants to read this data? The following happens. User, first of all, we check if this user has access to the Databricks application. If the user has access to the Databricks application, the UI will be loaded. User needs to be authenticated. The UI will be loaded, and after loading the UI, any actions or clicks that are being performed on the app are running under a dedicated service principal. Okay. We indeed recommend to use, least privilege principle when managing permissions for such service principles. So the service principal running under the app will connect to the SQL warehouse or the model serving endpoint, And the SQL warehouse will reach out to the Unity Catalog service, and Unity Catalog service will verify whenever the service principal has access or not. And if the answer is yes, then Unity Catalog will go to the object storage and generate short-lived Unity Catalog tokens. Return them back to the SQL warehouse. The SQL warehouse will read the actual data, then it will pre-process it accordingly with any row or column level security, and then it will return the result back to the app, and the app will display the result for the user. Just think about the amount of steps that are happening here to ensure the security. And the most important thing is that the user interfaces are very fast. So, this works really, really well under the hood. I'm always surprised how fast it is. Um, you may ask like, okay, but this is service principal based. So any user of the application will go under this service principal. And yes, this is the current status of Databricks apps. However, we are planning to change the status quo when we're going towards GA. And Giran will be talking about this when we get closer to the roadmap section. As of now, each Databricks app has a dedicated service principal. Any permissions granted to the service principal will work. And you on the backend side can decide, how the data will be shown to the end user. Um, Second thing is about installing the dependencies. So the Databricks apps may require some dependencies, and managing dependencies sometimes can be complex. First of all, some companies allow downloading libraries from public repos like pyp.org. Some companies prefer to use self-hosted repos. And in some cases, UC volumes may be the place where you can load the libraries and store them there. The good thing is that Databricks apps can install libraries from any of those sources, which is quite convenient. And if you are using apps, they are subject to serverless egress control or serverless egress gateway. That's the old name. New name is serverless egress control. So you can actually limit where this app will be able to go in terms of network. Okay. So, users will not be able just to go and grab or start parsing services or anything like that. You can control this securely through the Databricks means of security control. What is also quite important is that any library installed inside the Databricks app, they are running on a sandboxed container, and it runs on a dedicated compute, right? So we also add some security levels here, but this is a shared responsibility model. So Databricks is responsible for making sure that the whole infrastructure is responsible, but indeed, choosing which libraries to install, and from there, this is the choice of the customer, which we do not prevent. And therefore, customers are responsible for managing and or patching the dependencies they are using on the Databricks application. Okay, and with that in mind, I probably would like to touch upon the topic of the product roadmap. And Giran, maybe we should split this. I will cover the first slide and you will talk about the timeline, okay?
Sounds good to me.
Perfect. Let's move towards that piece. So quite an important thing, what is our vision for applications in general, right? Why do we think that this is an important part of the product surface, right? Our idea is practically the following. Applications are a way to interact with the data intelligence platform, which Databricks is. Uh, Databricks nowadays is the place where you can combine, collect, govern huge multitude of data and related to them services. And most of the modern applications, in one or another way, are based on data. So instead of pulling the data out of the ecosystem, we can bring applications inside the ecosystem. And this will make many things way simpler. including things like management, permission control, access, and so on and so forth. And this is why we brought apps as a part of our interfaces, okay? And apps is a secure, scalable solution, and it's also cloud agnostic, which is quite important if you're, considering that thing as important one. And our idea is that with apps, users will be able to expand the way how developers on the Databricks will be able to expand the ways how users can work with Databricks, and how end users, how business users can interact with the data. Would it be just a chatbot which uses your company data, or would it be something more advanced? This is up to you as a developer. We give you the tool to do this, and it's a flexible and powerful tool which is intended to help you to build any kind of a data product, if you wish. And with that, Giran, I am handing this over to you to talk about the timeline. I'm going to stop sharing, okay?
Perfect, thanks, Ivan. Let me just go ahead and bring up my version. So we'll take a look at the window. So hopefully that's coming through with the team. And again, yeah, just a massive kudos to you, Ivan, for just when your environments are shut down, having to respin up everything, using infrastructure as code, getting it all operational within an hour. That's just an incredible feat. So thank you very much for doing that. And yeah, it just goes to show again how quickly we can able not just provision the infrastructure but actually the environment as well as the application through sort of automation. And it's a real testament to how we're helping customers across the board industrialize that. And kind of taking a little bit further in terms of today, as I sort of mentioned at the start of the call, that apps are what we call under public preview. So we do have official SLAs from that perspective. But in terms of getting to a general availability release, the team is working very tirelessly to get that across the board for Q1 this 2025. And there's a bunch of capabilities that we're working towards doing that, as well as doing kind of more general region availability, because one of the questions that we always get asked is, this capability is great at Databricks, but is it available for my region? Rest assured, yes, we are working across all three clouds, AWS, Azure, and GCP, and as well as additional regions there to support this capability there as well. In terms of looking forward, and again, this is very much the journey's just kind of started in this perspective. And as sort of Ivan mentioned, again, we're bringing the applications closer to the data, and that's going to unlock a whole bunch of capabilities and value for our customers. And to help unlock some of that stuff, we understand, again, there's some aspects today which we want to improve and to be able to kind of broaden the capability. And I kind of wanted to kind of break this down into kind of three important themes, which is in relation to the availability of the raw, platform as a service, as it call, looking at it from an operational lens, and then actually how do we then democratize and distribute that out to users. So if we're looking at the first start, as mentioned there today, when you create an application slot, you get two vCPUs and 6 gigabytes of memory. Again, very lightweight as an intent, but for some use cases, we actually need to sort of scale that up. So very, very critical to that is making sure that we have a way to help resize it to have a scalable workload, so as well as vertical and horizontal cloud support region. That all goes to from that perspective. And key things around authentication. So we talked about on behalf user authentication. So that's going to be really critical to interacting with data sets through Unity Catalog there as well. What we do want as well is, again, although Python's going to be kind of the primary interface, we do see a number of users who are, again, quite familiar with JavaScript frameworks like Node as runtime. And then what we won't be able to do then is be able to bring that native runtime directly into Databricks apps. So the ability to then develop a full-scale, let's say, Node application and have that run is going to be what we're looking at, and support for additional other environments there as well. So R and Posit. And key to this as well, as we democratize the use, is actually thinking about building these scalable applications, not just works in a monolithic way, but thinking about it from a microservice perspective. So we'll actually be talking about API-based applications where users don't necessarily need to log in, but provide a kind of a bearer token authentication to be able to access that. So think of it as, a data as a sort of contract, or API as a contract. And this ties quite well into some additional capabilities if you're building kind of agentic AI systems. Again, it'll be part of that toolkit, which you can call an apps will be the surface for that. Key to making things a lot enterprise, coming in from the operational lens, is then looking at ways of how do we sort of manage costs. And there's a capability called budgets that's available at Databricks today. So you're already able to kind of tag your workloads and have that associated. So administrators and business owners can keep track of their costs and understand how this is kind of operating. But equally as well, if there's some more broad organizations, what does it look like from a chargeback perspective? So again, we'll offer various different ways to surface that information from that perspective. And key thing as well, we talked a little bit about monitoring, but we want to extend the observability stack. So allowing you to go in, see how your app is performing, also at an infrastructure level, and being able to adjust that on the fly. But again, we try to handle all of those good things with our serverless platform. And looking forward to distribution, right? It's quite, we want to make apps very easy to deploy and use, but actually, more importantly, is actually get that into the hands of business users. So we'll be introducing capabilities in relation to integration with our Databricks marketplace. So what that means is you're able to pull in trusted applications, whether that's native applications that Databricks has built or trusted third-party applications to be able to use on your data set. And a good example of that is around the kind of a security cyber framework. So there's an open schema framework when it comes to looking at telemetry data there today. As an example to that is we could build an application for you. So irrespective of what security SIEM tool they're using, you will have a fundamental set of data, which is processed using Databricks. And again, you'll have a unified application. So you don't need to rewrite the wheel. Take an application, use it on Databricks today, and extend that out. And a key thing to this as well is we want to help drive usage and adoption on the platform. So unlike some other solutions out there where you're looking at things on a subscription, on a user-based perspective, we don't charge per that. We only charge per based on the compute using. And again, our way is just to help democratize and simplify the licensing model that you might see with other solutions out there from that perspective. And with that in mind, appreciate we've covered a great deal of things. So I just wanted to kind of round it out in terms of today's session. So as mentioned, applications are effectively GA in the next couple of months. So what we would recommend to you is looking at any applications in the organization that may benefit from this and additional services. And kind of key to this is, look at what you're doing at the moment, see what might be a good fit, and then identifying and quickly prototyping on that. As mentioned, I think one of the things that I always see is that development is not really a spectator sport. So I would say, just roll up your sleeves, put a bit of elbow grease, and start building. You use the templates that we have available today. It's very easy for you to spin up the environment, take some source code, and then publish that out. So we definitely want users to interact with that from that perspective. And what I would say from how do we proceed further? Well, as I mentioned, look at some existing codes today. See where you can pull that onto Databricks. If you're already calling Databricks APIs, why not just use an application to have that embedded already and then save yourself a lot of development loops? One of the things that we want to be able to do is drive further adoption. So if you are interested in exploring further avenues with Databricks apps, please reach out to your account team for further assistance, whether that comes to looking at it from a roadmap perspective, use case ideation, and some additional guidance, from myself, Yvonne, and the wider field community. And last but not least, massive shout out to Stephanie for hosting us on her channel. Please give a like, a follow, and a subscribe to the Skill Builders for Databricks channel for more fantastic sessions that are coming. So again, appreciate wherever you're in the world. Thank you very much for your time and attention. We really look forward to working with you closely and making a Databricks apps a success for your organization. Thank you so much.